Here is Lynn Golding speaking about the Mending. Well, hi, everybody. First of all, thank you so much, Alexa. One of the good things about COVID, and we do look for the good things, is the incredible amount of time we've been able to spend with two, at least, of our 20-something kids. So it's great that we can have this launch party and have some people here in the house with us. So yeah, it has been a year and a half since we scheduled the release of The Mending. Time has really flown by. I have to say, when we scheduled it 18 months ago, we didn't think we would be in a pandemic. Just last year, Heidi, my publisher, and I were congratulating ourselves. Thank goodness we didn't launch this book in 2020. Everything will be fine in 2021. Well, we counted our chickens a little bit too early. I don't know about you, but I take a lot of pleasure with the special milestones in life still being able to be celebrated in this pandemic. And so over the past year in our family, we've celebrated a COVID wedding when our eldest, Alex, and his then fiance, Emily, got married. We've had two 80th birthdays, one 60th wedding anniversary. We've had new jobs, new contracts, and now a book launch. Most of you know that Beneath the Alders is a historical fiction trilogy. It takes place in Brampton, Ontario between 1907 and 1931. The very first book was The Innocent, and it covered the period from 1907 to July 1914. It ended with the protagonist saying that the future was really looking quite bright. The next book was The Beleaguered. It started in August 1914. Ultimatums are going on all over Europe. The future is not bright. But that book is about World War I. And then the last book, The Mending, it starts in August of 1918 and it goes to 1931. People are trying to return to that innocent life they had before the war, the life they had before they were beleaguered. They're never able to, but a new life is forged, and it may be one that is better in a lot of ways and certainly more enduring. And many of you know that my book series was inspired by my great aunt, Jessie Roberts Current, who was born in 1903. Jessie was raised to believe that she would finish school, become a teacher, teach for a couple of years, get married, and then lead a life pretty much like the one her mother led. But Jessie came of age at the end of World War I. There just were not enough men available for Jessie and many of the women in her generation, and so she had to forge a very different path. She went to university, she studied biochemistry, she became a researcher, then a professor, then a dean at U of T. She led movements for labeling laws. She had a radio show. She was in the RCAF. She just had a really incredible life. And that was really what propelled me to write this book. We all know the incredible sacrifice that the young men of her generation paid in that war. But what we don't talk about so much is how that war affected the lives of other people, really everybody. Canadian life changed a lot after that war. So I hope you'll see some of that when you read The Mending. So now I'm going to turn this over to Tony. All of you know that Tony is no longer a politician. He now dabbles in a number of startups, but in addition, he is a professional interviewer. He has two programs. One is a podcast with Jody Jenkins called And Another Thing. And on that podcast, they interview people in the music business, politicians or people involved in public policy, and wrestlers. Maybe a few other people involved in sports as well. And then Monday to Friday, you can catch Tony on Boom and Bust, which is a show on the News Forum. You can get that on Global, no, not Global, Telus, Bell, Access, and the Internet. Yeah. And in that show, Tony interviews people who are involved in Canada's economy or who are commenting on Canada's economy. Now, I don't think Tony has ever interviewed a historical fiction author, so this will be the first.
It will be the first, and I'm so delighted to be here with Lynn and all of you, all of our viewers. Welcome to this broadcast here on Facebook. It's great to have you along, and we're going to have a little bit of fun with Lynn, learning a little bit more about her book. So without doing anything else, we're just going to get right to it and have a little bit of a conversation with Lynn Golding on her new book. First of all, Lynn, can you tell us a little bit about the cover of the book? I know you spent a lot of time and a lot of detail making sure the cover was the right cover. Tell us a little bit about that.
I will. First of all, I'll show it to you, and I hope you will agree it is a beautiful cover. It was designed by Kevin Patterson, who designed the other two covers as well. And I asked him to do 4 things when he designed this cover. I asked him to have it evoke the feeling of spring. The innocent kind of evoked summer, and the beleaguered fall. This was to evoke spring. I wanted it to be different than the other two. I didn't want people to pick it up and say, oh, I've already read that book. So it had to be different. I wanted it to speak to the 4 themes or the 4 periods of the book. And I wanted it to be as beautiful as the other 2 covers. So that was a pretty tall order to fill. At times I said, Kevin, it's your own fault. You did such a good job on the other 2 covers. It is a big job to meet that same standard. Anyway, after about 20 attempts, me and the members of my focus group agreed that this was just absolutely beautiful. So it's the same parlor that you've seen at the front of the other 2 books, but this time we've zeroed in on the window, and you can see that there are alder trees in bloom out that window. On the front here, we have a painting by Samuel Stevenson Finley, and this painting features prominently in the last third of the book. And on the back, we have a picture of Jesse's family at the end of World War I, and then a picture of Jesse graduating from university, and then finally a picture of the ship that Jessie and her family took when they returned from a European trip in 1926. So these 4 periods really speak to the different periods of the book.
Lovely. I think that's just a great cover, and I think it's very attractive. So
thank you.
Congratulations on that. Now, as Alexa had already mentioned, this book, or at least part of the book, takes place around the time of the Spanish flu. I guess they called it epidemic at the time. We'd probably call it a pandemic. Mm-hmm. So what was it like writing about the Spanish flu when we were having our own pandemic at the same time? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, it's true. It was really interesting, and partly because I didn't think it was going to be very interesting writing about Spanish flu at all. In fact, in my first manuscript, the book kind of went from November of 1918 to some point in 1919. And my editor, Alistair Thompson, said, how can you write this and not have anything about Spanish flu? I said, I don't have any content. No one in Jesse's family died of Spanish flu. I'd already written about a quarantine. Those of you who have read The Innocent will remember that we had an episode of scarlet fever in Peel County in 1910. And so I'd already described a quarantine. I just thought, what more is there to say? And Alistair said, no, you cannot write a book about Canadian history in that period of time and not talk about Spanish flu. So I had all the rest of the book done, but in January of 2020, I asked my researcher, Colleen Mahoney, I said, can you dig up some facts? What caused it? How did it get to Canada? How were people affected by it? What happened to it? And while she was doing that, I went back to the Brampton Library and to my good friend, the microfilm reader, and started rereading newspapers from the fall of 1918. And I thought it was going to be a bit of a drudgery. But, of course, because it was at the same time as COVID was breaking out in Wuhan and making its way to Italy and Iran, I could see it was really, really interesting. So I ended up writing a whole new chapter at the beginning of the book, the second chapter, which takes place completely during Spanish flu. And then the first chapter, I kind of rearranged that a little bit. So again, Spanish flu was in the background. Neither chapter is a story about Spanish flu, but Spanish flu is in the background. And for those of you who like the zany Aunt Lil character, you won't be surprised to know that she did not abide by the quarantine rules. She came to Brampton during the quarantine, and while she was there in chapter 2, we hear her backstory. So that's how I ended up fitting it all in.
Now, this isn't, the next question isn't precisely about the book, but you did so much research about the Spanish flu. What was life like during the Spanish flu, and can you compare and contrast it to life during COVID?
I could go on for a very long time doing that, but I'll just pick out a few things. So first of all, the Spanish flu hit Toronto on I think September 29th, 1918, and for about 3 weeks they went into kind of public lockdown the same way we had here. They closed schools, churches, theaters, any places of public gathering. The same thing happened in Brampton about 10 days later. Now, I say they closed all these places of public gathering. There was one exception. People were still able to gather to go to rallies to raise money for victory bonds. So I guess the thought was that if our men could be overseas putting their lives at risk in trenches, that we at home could do the same thing to raise the money to bring them home early. Businesses did not close the same way they did here. Their hours reduced. I could tell that by the advertisements in the newspaper, but I think that was mostly because their workforce was reduced. At the end of the kind of 3 weeks, did I tell you 3 weeks?
3 weeks,
3 weeks,
yeah.
yes. Not 3 months, not 13 months, 3 weeks of this, public order to stay home and not attend these big public events. Everybody went back to life as normal. In Brampton, at that point, 40% of the population had contracted Spanish flu. And the Spanish flu, it didn't really go away. They thought it would, but, it reared its ugly head every winter for the next few years. And we'll save that for another time. But in actuality, Spanish flu has never really, really left us. So it was quite interesting.
Interesting, yes. Now, if you know anything about Lynn's books, the characters are unforgettable. They really jump off the page, and you really get a sense of these people. Some of them zany, some of them severe, some of them, just going in and out of Jesse's life. So I got to ask this question: do you have a favorite character?
Well, I always say that Jessie, the protagonist, is my favorite character. So Jessie is inspired by my actual Aunt Jessie. I changed her last name. I changed the last names of all of the main characters, but she certainly is the inspiration for that character. She never knew that. If she'd known that, she would have forbade me from doing it. But anyway, she's not haunting me, so I'm thinking she's okay with it. But my favorite character of this new book is a fellow named Henry Percival Montgomery Moorhead. And I'm hoping by that long multisyllabic name you gather that he's British. He's from a good family, or at least a once good family. He comes to Canada and he becomes Jesse's beau. He is witty and droll. He's irreverent. He's mischievous. He's a little bit rebellious, and he's also romantic. And so I just had a lot of fun writing that character. It's so different from any of my other characters. He was a bit of a bootlegger, if you will. So he was certainly the most popular person at all the parties that he and Jesse went to. And I will tell you this, he is inspired, or at least his manner of speaking is inspired by a famous actor. So I will leave it to the readers to see if they can figure out who inspired at least his way of speaking.
Lovely, lovely. Well, that'll be another part of the guessing game of the book, I suppose. Now, obviously, I think it's very difficult to write a book, and to write 3 books it's unfathomable to me. Was there any part of this writing that was more difficult than the rest?
I have 2 parts that are quite difficult for me. One is writing about sports. And that's because I don't really know very much about sports. I'm sure my parents are just, rolling their eyes at the moment because they're big sports fans. But you can't write about Brampton in the early 1900s and not write about sports. It was a big part of their life. So in the Innocent, we have 2 lacrosse games. We have the Brampton Excelsiors in Vancouver vying for the Mann Cup. And then in the Beleaguered, we have a hockey game. I'm happy to say that in the Mending, there's only a very small part of sports. Jessie plays hockey. She falls, hurts her knees, and has arthritis in her knee ever since that affected her life. So that was reported. But the hardest thing about writing for this new book was a battle scene. I had to write about the Battle of Amiens. Now, even though the book starts after that battle, Jessie and her family go to France, and they go to that to Amiens, and there's a bit of a mystery solved about that particular battle. So I probably spent a whole summer of my writing time working on that particular battle, reading so much about it, trying to understand where the various troops were from different countries, where the different brigades were, how they moved, what the ammunition was. I mean, I just spent a lot of time on it. And even when it was done, I was a little, insecure that I still didn't have it right. So I was lamenting that last summer, I guess, or spring, at the dinner table. And Alexa said, "You should see if my history professor can help you. Professor Jonathan Vance, he is a military historian." So I got in touch with him, and he tapped one of his PhD students, Brian McClure, on the shoulder and said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing this?" So Brian read those 2 chapters, and he gave me some, really great insights and some new facts, but also confirmed a lot that I had written. So that was a really great
Yeah,
service.
no, that's a story within a story there. I'm going to continue on this vein. I know we've got just a few minutes left, but uh, was there any part of the book that was particularly poignant for you?
Yes, I guess I'll just carry on. First of all, there are a few very poignant parts, and my mother-in-law said that she was drawn to tears a few times. That we authors love that. That is when the scene is intended to bring tears,
Yes.
which it was. So I'm just going to read you a little bit from the Mending about that trip to Europe, to the battlefields. Now, this is taking place, Jessie's describing a car ride. She and her family are in a car. They are driving from Paris to Amiens. They're going to a little place outside of Amiens called Le Canal. Our drive to Le Canal was a solemn one. The vivacity of Montmartre, the splendor of the Louvre, the decadence of Versailles faded with each mile traveled. I was overcome by 2 conflicting emotions. On the one hand, I felt extreme despondence. 8 years after the termination of hostilities, gigantic shell holes, ruined buildings, and dead trees still lined the roads we traveled. The people we passed looked sad and poor. Given the value of the franc, they were poor. At the same time, though, I felt hope, for above all the ruins was reconstruction and regeneration. Peeping up and around the dead trees were little branches and green shrubs. Grass and flowers were growing in and around the shell-made craters. Little homes were being repaired, their windows decorated with white curtains on the inside and nasturtiums and other flowers in the boxes on the outside. The grain was ripening in the fields. And this is a bit poignant, particularly for me, in addition to describing that scene, because our family took that same tour in about 2013. And, we went to the same town. We drove those same roads. I'm happy to say that, for the French people, the franc was in better condition,
Yes.
and a lot of the construction.
It was the euro then.
Well, it was the euro, that's true. And a lot of reconstruction had occurred at that time. And then the other thing that makes that really special to me is that it's the one, 2 chapters of the book that I was able to write based not just on what Jessie had told me, but also on what Jessie had written. Because Jessie kept a journal of that period of time. And this summer, my daughter Alexa transcribed that for me. And so it was a great aid for me, to check Jessie's recollection, which was provided to me 80 years after the trip. And Alexa enjoyed doing it so much, she ended up editing this book, annotating it, and self-publishing it herself. So I will
There it
just
is.
give Alexa a little plug here for her book, A Journey to Remember, which is available on Amazon.
Fantastic. Well, obviously writing runs in the family, so we're very proud of Alexa as well. Historical research, big part of your book, very
Yes.
important part. What can you tell me about what was the most interesting historical research that you did?
Yes, well, with Colleen, we did a lot of research, many, many topics, but one of the most fun, I think, was about life at university in the 1920s, because Jessie was enrolled at Victoria College at U of T in 1921. She was called a freshette, which is what the first years were called back then, if they were women. And the women at that time comprised about 1/3 of the class. Now, if she had been there 5 years earlier, I think the women would probably have been about half the class. And if she'd been there 5 years later, they wouldn't even have been 1/3. But it was just that period where men were returning from the front and starting to get back into university. This was a Methodist college, and so they had chapel every morning before classes. They had classes 5.5 days a week. They were not allowed to dance on Victoria College grounds. They could go elsewhere to dance. I don't need to talk about drinking because nobody could drink back then. And they had to live either in residence with their parents, with a guardian selected by their parents, or in a boarding house that had been approved by the president. So that was kind of interesting.
That is interesting. A little bit different these days. I'm going to skip around a little bit because we've just got a few minutes left. But your book series has been called A Love Letter to Brampton. I hope you're proud of that.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to that?
I love that. So, my story is a story about Jessie and her family and the women and men of Jessie's time. But it's also the story of Brampton. And in this book, we see Jessie grow and mature, and we all see Brampton go from being a village to a town to a city. Brampton is my city. I was born and raised here, still live here. So, I just love that title. But here's the other thing I really love. I have heard from people all across Canada, in the East Coast, in the West, who will say to me, I've never been to Brampton. I don't know anybody in Brampton, but your stories from the early 1900s sound just like the stories that my grandparents told me about growing up, on the East Coast or the West Coast. So this is a story for Brampton, but it's a story for small town Canada in the early 1900s.
Indeed, and I think it's amazing that we can continue to tell those stories because that time has come and gone in Canada, but it's an important part of our heritage and history. So now, question on behalf of your readers, how do you engage with your readers and how can readers get the book? Very important question.
Very important questions. Thank you for that opportunity. So first of all, most important, how can you get the book? The best place to get it right now is Indigo or Chapters. Order the book online. Ben McNally in Toronto, call him, email him. There are links to both of those places on my website and on my Facebook posts. Amazon is having some trouble right now, although I think you can get the Kindle version from Amazon right now. In terms of staying engaged with me, follow me on Facebook. I have a separate page for Beneath the Alders, and every week I try and post something about the history of the book. I also have a newsletter that goes out once a month, which has more in-depth historical topics. If you want to subscribe to that, let me know. And I have a YouTube station now, which has some videos about the book, and we're building more of those.
So once again, website, repeat that.
LynnGoldingAuthor.com for the website, and you're all on Facebook right now, so just follow me on my Beneath the Alders page.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. So I got to ask this question before we get to the toast. What's next for you?
I don't know. I have some ideas. I have an idea about a backstory to this series. I've got about 50,000 words of that written, but I'd have to do a fair bit more work to finish that off. I've got an idea for another book that would be in the 1960s, and I've got an idea for a couple of actual fiction books. So
there's lots going on. I think Lynn Golding is going to be around for a long time as an author. So we want to congratulate her, and we are about to have a toast, as I understand it. I guess we're in that range now. So I know that on your invitation, you suggested that for some fun, people might want to conceal their drink.
You have something bubbly or something not so bubbly, keeping in mind that this book is about Prohibition era, so try to keep it sneaky.
We had a period of prohibition, or temperance as it was called, in Ontario. It was mandated across Ontario from 1916 until 1927. So much of this new book takes place in that period of time. Those of you who have read the earlier books will know of the role that the Women's Christian Temperance Union played in the history of the time. So I just thought it would be fun to pick up on that right now and ask people to raise a glass in something concealed. Except for you, Tony, since you don't drink alcohol, you can actually have.
This is water.
Yeah.
In a wine glass.
In wine. And mine is in this thing that I think athletes use.
Yes, they do. Yes, they surely do.
So there we go. And Alexa, what does your mug say?
It's a coffee or tea mug. It says drink tea, read books, and be cozy, which I plan to do with the Mending.
There we go. Okay, let's do this. And you at home, please, this is the participation part of the program, so please participate with your favorite beverage. And let's toast.
So I'd like to raise a glass to the conclusion of Jessie's story, The Mending, and for the many more books to come from you, Mom.
Oh, thank you.
Cheers.
And I would like to propose another toast. I have to thank just a few people before we go. My amazing Beneath the Alder team, headed up by Heidi Sander of Blue Moon, my editor, Alistair Thompson, my videographer, Deb Kiss, my incredible webmaster and designer, Kevin Patterson, Bob Pickard, who helps me with my social media, and Colleen Mahoney, my fantastic researcher. I have to thank my family, who's been with me through thick and thin on this, and all of you, friends and readers, who have been so enthusiastic, providing me with the support and encouragement that I need to complete this project. So to all of you.
Cheers.
This is a really bad way to drink wine.
Especially on air.
I'm so glad I didn't live in that time.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much for joining us. I'm sorry I didn't have time to review your comments online, but I will reply to all of them later tonight or tomorrow. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.